Hello everyone, welcome back. In our last session, we completed the topology of the body model. Now we are familiar with the entire process of topology. Although the topology is done, the model isn't quite finished yet. In this session, we'll start working on some remaining components. This will involve making the interior of the mouth, such as the gums, teeth, tongue, and claws. Alright, no more delays, let's dive into the next phase. Let's start with the mouth area. In the last lesson, we did most of the topology for the body model, but the lips were not sculpted, so we didn't work on them during the topology phase. Now, before we move on to making the internal structure of the mouth, let's first create the structure of the lips. Before we get started, let's determine our overall approach of production. In the mouth area, we need to create the lips, gums, teeth, and tongue. The structures of the gums, teeth, and tongue are relatively complex, so we'll create separate meshes for them. As for the lips, we'll continue extruding them from the body model and sculpting them inward to create their structure. Alright, let's start by creating the structure of the lips. First, select the loop of vertices along the edge of the mouth and extrude a loop inward directly. In order to see that clearly, let's jump into wireframe mode and adjust the position from different angles until it looks right. Now, let's divide this loop into front and side sections and begin by selecting the vertices on the side and extruding them towards the center. Let's go inside the mouth to adjust the positions. Next, we will fill the unclosed faces in the front. Let's count the number of vertices: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 8 vertices in total. We'll add 8 more edges on the back side. Press Ctrl+R to add them, then change the count to 8. Now, let's fill this area. Let's tidy up the positioning of the edges here. Okay, the upper lip looks not bad. Let's move on to the lower lip, using the same method. After selecting a portion of the lower lip, press Shift+H to hide everything except the portion we selected. You can see there are too many edges on the back side. Press Alt+H to display the upper lip. Then go back into the mouth to adjust the number of edges. Since we'll need to extrude deeper into the mouth and towards the rear of the throat, let's temporarily delete the posterior portion of faces. Select those faces and delete them. This will simplify some edges of the lower lip to match the number of vertices at the front. Alright, let's select the lower lip area again and press Shift+H to solo it. Now we can adjust the number of vertices based on the count at the front. Select some edges and press X, then choose Dissolve Edges. Now we can select the corresponding vertices to connect to. Okay, we've closed the surfaces of both the upper and lower lips. Next, let's return to the upper lip. Select this portion of faces and extrude them upwards to create the interior space of the mouth. Similarly, for the lower lip, extrude downwards to form the interior space of the lower mouth. Now, back inside the model, delete the faces at the posterior part. We'll need this part later to create structures deeper inside the mouth. Next, we need to add some intermediate edges to the area we extruded earlier to adjust the shape. This is to prevent affecting the outer model while adjusting the inner part of the mouth. To do this, select the faces inside the mouth and press Shift+H to solo them. Now we can add the intermediate edges without worrying about affecting other areas. Let's smooth out the shape a bit more. Switch to the side view and select the loop of vertices at the posterior part of the mouth to extrude the inner space of the mouth. Add some intermediate edges. Now, let's take a look at the effect of the mouth model inside. Next, we'll refine the internal structures for the upper and lower lips separately. Select a loop of vertices on the side, switch to vertex mode, and hide them with H. Then, hover the cursor over the area of the lower lip and press L to select it. Press Shift plus H to solo it. Let's add another loop of edges here. Smooth out the edges. The smoothing doesn't work. Let's check the specifics. First, let's see if it's a normal direction issue. Enter Edit mode, select all the meshes, then press Shift plus N to correct the normal directions and try smoothing again. Still not smoothing properly. It might be due to some accidentally enabled automatic masking. Press Alt plus A to examine. Looks like cavity got turned on at some point. Let's turn it off. Now, smooth it again. It works. The brush strength is too strong. Let's undo with Ctrl plus Z. Adjust the brush strength and then sculpt again. Alright, let's continue smoothing along this edge. When sculpting inside the mouth, we need to keep an eye on the outside as well because the distance between these two parts is very close, and sculpting might affect each other. To prevent this, we need to modify the brush settings. Press N to open the N panel of 3D view. Alright, we should enable screencast keys here. In the N panel, find the Tools section, and under Advanced Category, enable Front Faces Only. Now the parts below the mouth won't be affected. Let's smooth it out and see, there, not affected below. Alright, now let's focus on creating the structure for the lower lip. Let's find the reference images we prepared earlier. Here's the reference for the mouth. Now, let's create the structure of the lips according to the reference. For the lips, we can divide them into two main parts to work on: the black part on the side of the lips and the structure of a version at the front. Let's get started. First, we'll use Inflate brush to give thickness to the front of the lips. For the side part, let's select some vertices and try moving them upwards. We might need to enable fall off. It's a bit tricky to adjust that. Let's double tap R to change rotation method to trackball, and rotate downwards to give the inner side of the lips some rotation outward, creating a slight eversion effect. Based on that, let's adjust this circle shape inside the mouth. It's this circle according to the reference. Let's enter sculpt mode to adjust the structure here. One thing to note is that the structure on the inner side actually overlaps with the lips. Since the lips are on the outside, we need to be mindful of this during creation. It is a bit inconvenient to adjust it directly, so let's try extruding. Select this portion of faces. Press E to extrude upwards. order to have a smooth transition with the surrounding structure, we need to adjust the edges here. Okay, let's enter sculpt mode and modify the shape here again. Let's display the structure of the upper lip and adjust it accordingly. Now, we are going to use the topology option in the auto mask during sculpting. If it's disabled, sculpting the lower lip might affect the upper lip as well. With topology enabled, the software will automatically recognize the model's topology, so adjusting the lower lip won't affect the upper lip. Now let's go back to the outside of the mouth and adjust the overall structure of the mouth. Alright, the structure of the mouth looks much better now. Next, let's display the lower lip separately and then adjust the mesh inside the lip. Let's smooth out the mesh inside with smooth brush. Currently, we can see that the wireframe around the lips is not evenly distributed. The outer edges are sparse while the inner ones are dense. Let's try using the Slide Relax brush to smooth out the mesh here. The smoothing effect isn't ideal, so let's manually adjust it. Enter Edit mode. Let's select these edges and adjust them until they look even. Alright, let's jump into sculpt mode to adjust the mesh in other areas. The lower lip is done. Let's continue to refine the upper lip. Select the mesh of the upper lip and solo it with Shift+H for adjustment. We need to add another loop of edges here. Let's adjust the structure inside the upper lip with sculpting. Alright, let's return to the outside of the model to refine it further. The mesh around the corners of the mouth needs some further refinement. It's a bit distorted here. Let's continue refining the structure of the mouth. We need to adjust the shape of the lower lip from the bottom view. Let's refer to the reference on the right and find the reference of the mouth we previously located. Let's adjust the shape and structure of the mouth according to the reference. Alright, it is done for the mouth section. Let's further adjust the structure of the mouth and nose according to the reference. We need to add another edge here in the nose area to create the groove between the nose and the mouth. There are still some issues around the corners of the mouth. Let's manually tweak the vertex positions here to make them more even. There aren't enough edges here, so let's add another one to alleviate the problem around the corners of the mouth. Then, let's enter sculpt mode to refine it further. After the tweaking, it looks much better around the corners of the mouth. Previously, when we were creating the nostrils and eyes, the faces inside were left open. Now that the body model is mostly complete, we can fill these areas. Here, we'll use the tool introduced earlier, Grid Fill. Select a loop of vertices, find Grid Fill, and then smooth it out. There's another issue with the eyes. You can see that the number of vertices in the inner loop of the eyes is 49, which is an odd number and can't be filled with Grid Fill. So, we need to add another edge. Smooth out the mesh again. Back to Edit mode, select this loop of vertices, use Grid Fill, and then adjust the values.
Okay.
Smooth it out once more, and it's done. With the completion of the internal structure of the mouth, the body model is now fully finished. Next, we need to continue working on other parts. Let's start again with the internal structure of the mouth. The interior of the mouth includes the gums, teeth, and tongue. We are going to start with the gums. When creating the internal structure of the mouth, it's essential to base it on the lips. So, here, we need to solo the area inside the lips for a closer look. After selecting the faces inside the mouth, let's enter Sculpt mode. Under the Face Sets menu, we assign the selected faces in Edit mode to a face set. We then enable display of the face set. Now, we can move the cursor over the face set area and press H to solo it. Let's use sculpting tools to adjust the structure on the backside of the mouth, as it needs more space internally. Alright, before we create the internal structure of the mouth, we need to gather some references as well. By researching, we find that a wolf mouth typically has a total of 42 teeth, 22 upper teeth, and 20 lower teeth. We are creating the mouth's internal structure according to the real references. Since we'll only be using the portion of mesh inside the mouth for creating the gums, select this part of the mesh, create a new vertex group with Ctrl+G. In the modifier panel, we add a mask modifier and assign it to the vertex group we just created. Now, the body is hidden, only the portion saved in the vertex group will be displayed. It will be more convenient to observe in the wireframe mode. Now, we can get started. For the gums, we'll start with a cube. I'll demonstrate the process of creating a model in Edit mode by creating the oral cavity. In the following steps, we will mainly work in Edit mode, and we will adjust the shape of the model in Sculpt mode as an auxiliary method. First, we need to delete half of it and add a mirror modifier to the model, which will help us reduce the workload by half and improve work efficiency. Let's quickly build the rough shape of the upper and lower gums. In edit mode, we have several most commonly used operations. The first is to move, scale, and rotate, and their shortcut keys are G, S, and R respectively. It allows us to adjust vertices, edges, and faces in edit mode at will. The second is Loop Cut tool. The shortcut key is Ctrl+R. We can add edges at any position. We have often used this tool in previous work, and I believe everyone is familiar with it. Another tool is Edge Slide tool. The shortcut key is to double-click G. You can slide the selected vertices and edges along the adjacent edges. It will not destroy the topological structure. It is very common when we adjust the vertices and edges of the model. Another thing is to make a model in edit mode. Unlike sculpt mode, we need to switch between different perspectives repeatedly to achieve the correct effect in each perspective. When switching perspectives, we can directly hold Alt and the middle mouse button in the 3D view at the same time, and slide up, down, left, and right, so that we can directly switch to the corresponding view, which is very fast. Okay, the gums are divided into upper and lower parts. We select the mesh of the upper gums, press Shift+D to copy, and then press S, Z, -1 to flip it up and down. Next, let's match the position and shape of the lower gums. We need to link the upper and lower gums together at the back end. Alright, we've quickly created the rough shape and position of the gums. Switch to solid mode. We select the body model and change the display mode to wireframe. This way, the shape of the gums becomes clearer. When actually creating the oral cavity, it's often efficient to sculpt the structure first and then proceed with topology. This method tends to be quicker and more convenient for adjustments. In order to cover the workflow of creating models in edit mode, I'm creating the model directly in edit mode. During your own creation process, feel free to change as needed. I recommend getting familiar with sculpting because it helps develop your observation skills for shape and structure. Topology, on the other hand, can improve our ability to analyze and think through problems. Modeling in edit mode requires more consideration. We need to think about the edge flow, extrusion, and when positioning vertices, we need to consider what structures to create and leave appropriate space in the mesh. Balancing these aspects can be challenging. As you can see, I'm gradually refining the model. Now, the approximate position and structure of the upper gum with the incisors are established. Let's extrude the structure where the lower incisors grow. Here on the side, we're reserving space for the lower gum's canine teeth. Next, we continue creating the structure of the posterior dental arch. However, locating the positions of the incisors and canine teeth at the front is relatively straightforward, allowing us to prepare the growth structure for the teeth in advance, even before creating the teeth themselves. Finding the growing positions for the posterior teeth is more challenging. To better construct the structure of the dental arch, we need to arrange the 42 teeth within the wolf's mouth according to the gathered references. These teeth will be sequentially put in the corresponding positions on the dental arch. Then, we are creating the corresponding structure of the dental arch according to the teeth's location. Let's hide the body model. Create the model for the incisors first. Here, we are using a cube as the base model. We first quickly adjust the rough shape of the incisors. There are 6 incisors both above and below. We'll move the teeth to the corresponding positions on the dental arch and add a mirror modifier. Next, we are creating the shapes of the teeth in detail. We'll find some references with teeth exposed and shape the teeth accordingly. Alright, let's duplicate all 6 teeth. Let's adjust the shape of the incisors and the positional relationship between the gums and teeth according to the distribution of the 6 teeth. The gums also need to be adjusted. Let's further modify the shape of the teeth. We need to find another reference in which teeth can be clearly seen. This picture shows the side shape of the teeth. Let's modify the shape of the teeth according to the reference. The references we have seen so far are all from the side. I hope to find a reference that shows the shape of the teeth from the front. Let's look through the current references to see if we can find a more suitable reference picture. This picture shows the lower teeth, but the shape seems a bit weird. Let's look for another one. Okay, let's go back to this picture. During the creation process, if you find that there are missing references, you can search directly and you should be able to find a lot. Here, due to copyright issues, we will not find other references for now. Let's continue to adjust the shape of the teeth based on this reference. Now, let's continue to create the canine teeth in the upper teeth. Again, starting from a cube. Alright, let's adjust the shape of the cube. The shape of the canines is done quickly. I've noticed a slight issue with the shape of the incisors. Let's select the model of the incisors and tweak it a little bit in sculpt mode. Okay, let's merge the canine teeth and incisors into one model. Select the canine teeth first, then the incisors, and press Ctrl+J. Now we can observe the teeth's effect intuitively from the front view. Let's enter sculpt mode and make some overall adjustments. The canine teeth need to be moved a bit towards the center, as they splay out too much at the bottom. Let's use the grab brush to pull them inward. Alright, let's adjust the shape of the incisors regarding the overall effect. Actually, the overall shape of the incisors is almost there, but I feel something's off with the individual tooth shapes. So, I'm still trying to pinpoint the issue. If I can't find it, we'll proceed further. With continued refinement, the effect will gradually improve, so there's no need to spend too much time on one aspect. Next, we are going to create the front part of the lower teeth. But before that, let's make some adjustments to the lower dental arch. Okay, we can simply select the completed upper teeth. Press Shift plus D to duplicate. Then press S, Z, -1. I noticed that after flipping, the effect is not right. Let's undo it. Before flipping, we need to change the pivot point to median point. Then we perform the previous operation again. After flipping it, we need to correct the normal directions as well because when flipped, the normal directions of the model are flipped also. Let's correct the normal directions with Shift plus N. Now we have the flipped teeth. Let's place them where the lower incisors should be. Let's refine the positions of the incisors. The lower incisors should be on the inner side of the upper incisors. We need to position them slightly closer to the inside. Alright, let's select the dental arch model and enter sculpt mode to modify its shape to match the teeth. For the canine teeth, the process is the same. We'll select the upper canine teeth and press Shift plus D to duplicate them. Then press R to rotate the tooth. This is a very quick way to get a lower canine tooth. Let's place it into the correct position. At the bottom of the teeth, there are overlaps between the gum and the teeth which need to be adjusted. Alright, now we can see the front of the teeth is all completed. Next, let's modify the structures of the teeth and gums according to the overall effect. The canine teeth are a bit slender, so we'll use inflate brush to make them thicker. Okay, next, let's start making the posterior teeth. We are still going to start with a cube. However, before we create the posterior teeth, there's no corresponding structure on the posterior gum currently, so we need to create basic undulations on the gum so there's a correct place to contain the teeth. Let's start with the lower teeth. The first tooth is a small one not far from the canine tooth. It's also the smallest among the lower teeth. Once created, let's duplicate this tooth backward and start making the second tooth. The next teeth differ significantly in shape from the first one, with the largest tooth having 3 sharp peaks on top. We duplicate this tooth 3 times, with the middle one being the largest, then connect the 3 middle faces. We need to delete the adjacent faces before we can connect them. This quickly creates a new tooth. This tooth we're making is the last molar, so it will be larger in size. We can press / to solo the model for adjustment. Alright, let's move this tooth to the back. Here, it's important to note that there's a slightly smaller tooth in the wolf's lower gum behind this largest molar, so we won't place this tooth directly at the very back. Let's duplicate another tooth, make it slightly smaller, and place it in front of the previous one. Okay, now let's further refine the shapes of these 2 teeth. The lowest points between each peak of the latter tooth need to be moved a bit upward. And we also need to adjust the positions of the highest points of 2 peaks. After adjustments, the shapes look much better. Using the same method, let's adjust the shape of this tooth. However, it's necessary to note that this tooth shouldn't be identical to the one behind it, which is why we need to duplicate it separately for adjustment. After modification, let's move it to the corresponding position. Duplicate the third tooth. Adjust its position. We also need to place the fourth tooth in the middle, so the small tooth in front needs to be moved forward. Now, let's select the third tooth and duplicate it as the fourth one. The fourth one will be smaller and closer to the small tooth in front. Alright, let's make the last molar for the lower teeth by duplicating the largest one and moving it to the back end. This tooth has 2 peaks, so we need to delete one. Fill the faces deleted. When the face is already filled, we can press J to create an edge between 2 vertices. In this state, we cannot press F to connect the 2 vertices. This must be remembered, and then we'll adjust the shape of this tooth. Alright, it looks good overall. Let's modify the shape of each individual tooth to make it look more natural. Currently, the distribution of the lower teeth is complete. Let's adjust the shape of the teeth overall. Merge this section of teeth with the front incisor model into one mesh. Then we'll make adjustments overall. That's it. For now, we don't need to refine the details of these tooth shapes urgently. Next, we'll create the upper teeth. Here, we'll directly select the lower teeth we just created. Press Shift plus D to duplicate them, then press SY-1. We got the upper teeth quickly. Press Shift plus N to correct the normal directions. The upper teeth generally sit on the outer side of the lower teeth, so let's adjust their positions in top view, placing them slightly outside the lower teeth. But we also need to consider the position of the gum, so we shouldn't offset them too much. Next, let's adjust the positions of each upper tooth one by one. The distribution of the upper teeth should be a bit tighter than the lower teeth. Alright, it looks good. Let's adjust the shape of the gum to match the position for the growth of the teeth. Currently, the upper teeth are duplicated from the lower teeth. However, the shapes of the upper teeth don't correspond one-to-one with the lower teeth. Therefore, we need to adjust the shapes of individual upper teeth accordingly. Let's start with the first one. In the upper teeth, the first tooth has 2 peaks, so let's select this tooth and directly duplicate it to the right. Oh, sorry, there are multiple selections here. Press Ctrl plus Z to undo. Let's redo the selection and press Shift plus D to duplicate. Link these two meshes. Since there are many meshes, it's inconvenient to adjust them, so let's display them separately. After deleting the middle face, we can merge the vertices on both sides. Here we can directly merge two adjacent vertices. After selecting two vertices, press M to merge them. You may notice that I used a shortcut key here, Shift plus R, which is used to repeat the previous operation. So after we have merged once before, when selecting other vertices to merge, we can directly press Shift plus R to merge them. Then we just need to adjust the shape a bit, and this tooth is done. Alright, let's display the other teeth. These teeth need to be moved downward a bit. In the upper teeth, the last tooth should have 3 peaks. So let's delete this tooth, duplicate it again. Enter the bottom view and place it in the correct position. Let's enter sculpt mode again to adjust the effect of the gum and teeth overall. Actually, there's one missing tooth in the lower teeth. It's at the very back, a small one. Let's drag the back end of the gum backward a bit to make space for the last tooth to grow. Duplicate one, shrink it, and place it here. The position of the last upper tooth needs further adjustment. First, let's modify the shape of the gum until it looks right. Then match the positions and shapes of the teeth. Let's add a level 1 subdivision surface modifier by pressing Ctrl plus 1. The root of the teeth is somehow separated from the gum. Let's refine it a bit. Adjust the crevices between the teeth. Rotate this tooth outward a bit. Next, let's check the shape of each tooth again and make final adjustments. Don't forget to save the project. Alright, we've finished the teeth for now. Next, let's refine the gum. For the gum part, we mainly create the structure of the gum based on the positions where the teeth grow. Let's add enough edges to the gum, using Ctrl+R to quickly add edges in the middle. It is quite simple to add edges in their corresponding position for the growth of teeth. There should be at least one edge in front and one at the back of each tooth. Alright, let's enter sculpt mode to adjust the shape. First, let's create the general shape of the gums. In the areas where the teeth grow, the gums should protrude slightly, and in the crevice between teeth, they should be slightly recessed. Let's quickly add this effect using sculpt brushes. Alright, next, we'll enter edit mode and start selecting the faces on the teeth to extrude the corresponding gum structures. The first tooth. The second one. For easier viewing, let's temporarily hide the upper gum. Continue extruding the gum structure for the third tooth. The fourth one. The fifth one. The sixth one. Alright, now we've extruded the gum structure downwards for each tooth. However, it's still rough at the moment. It is slow to adjust vertices, edges, and faces directly in edit mode. After extruding the rough structure, let's enter sculpt mode to adjust it. Here, using the grab brush and smooth together, we can get the gum structure quickly. Moving on to create the posterior teeth. Both the outside and inside of the gums need adjustments. Alright, let's continue adjusting the remaining parts. We adjust to ensure each tooth is properly encapsulated by the gum. Looks good. We'll also need to create gum structures for the canine teeth and incisors. For the canine teeth, we'll select the faces reserved for their growth and extrude this part of the gum structure. Then, we'll add some edges to adjust the shape. In some areas, there are still relatively few edges, so we need to add some more. Enter Sculpt mode. We'll use Relax Brush to even out the mesh. We'll add another loop around each tooth's gum area. Alright, let's smooth it out. We still need to add new edges in these areas. Let's press Ctrl+R to add edges. Enter Sculpt mode to smooth the mesh. The gum structure looks much better now. Next, we'll work on the incisors part. Before we create it, we need to add some edges, or the poly count won't be sufficient. Alright, we'll extrude them one by one based on the growing positions of the teeth. While using the mirror modifier, the middle part of the mesh is likely to cause issues. Enter wireframe display mode. We can see that the faces we extruded are automatically connected in the middle. This is caused by the merge and clipping options in the mirror modifier. Let's disable merge and clipping. Now it works. Alright, let's extrude the other parts. Enter Sculpt mode for adjustments. When we disable merge and clipping in the mirror modifier, issues like these separations in the middle can occur more easily. But it's okay. we can manually merge them later. Once we turn on these options, issues arise in the middle, so let's keep them disabled. To address this issue, we can use Auto Mask. Let's press Alt+E to open the Auto Mask Pie menu. Enabling Mesh Boundary ensures that no matter how we sculpt, the edges of the mesh won't be affected, preventing the middle of the model from splitting while using the mirror modifier. Alright, let's continue adjusting the gum structure. As we have refined the incisors, we're almost done with the entire lower dental arch. Next, we'll further refine the gum structure based on the teeth positions. Let's display the upper dental arch to get an overall view. Alright, let's continue adjusting. There are still some areas on the lower arch that need further refinement. Previously, our focus has been on creating these localized effects, but now we need to conduct an overall check. We can't smooth here due to Auto Mask, but we ignore it for now. Let's even out the model's mesh with Slide Relax Brush. We also need to add some more edges for the incisors part. After adding them, we can use the brush to smooth out the mesh. In Sculpt mode, we can't adjust the middle part of the mesh due to Auto Mask limitations. We'll manually adjust these areas in Edit mode. Alright, that's basically done. Next, let's start creating the upper dental arch. The process for creating the upper dental arch is the same as the lower one. First, let's create the rough gum structure for each tooth. Select the corresponding face of each tooth and extrude inward to get the structure of gum. Oh, we forgot to add edges before extruding, but that's okay. We can add them later. Let's add some intermediate edges on each tooth. Then, let's enter sculpt mode for adjustments. We need to add some more edges in areas with relatively few edges. Back to sculpt mode for further adjustments. I'm not sure if this method of creation is the most suitable, but for now, it seems to allow me to quickly create the gum structure. Alright, let's smooth out the mesh. Remember to disable auto mask, so the edges in the middle won't be affected. Switch to grab brush to adjust the gum shape. Add another edge here. And add another edge for the canine teeth as well. Okay, now we are going to create the incisor part. Again, we'll extrude inward from the corresponding faces. Enter sculpt mode for further adjustments. Let's add 2 more edges here. Use Relax Brush to smooth the mesh. Since adding edges also affects the adjacent mesh, we need to smooth both front and back. Alright, let's continue adjusting the gum for the incisors. With our adjustments, we're almost done. Let's display all the gums. There are some unconnected edges at the junction between the upper and lower dental arches. This is because we worked on them separately during creation, so we need to connect them now that they're one model. Let's add edges in the corresponding areas to connect them. This applies to both the upper and lower dental arches. In areas with few edges, let's add some more to ensure the mesh is distributed evenly. Then, go back to Sculpt mode. Using Mesh Relax Brush to smooth out the mesh. Okay, let's return to the upper dental arch. There's a detail in the middle of the upper dental arch to be created, which consists of 3 structures: hard palate, soft palate, and uvula. The most distinctive one is the hard palate, which is also the foremost. When you touch or look directly at the hard palate, you may perceive horizontal creases. Both humans and wolves have this feature of the hard palate. You can touch your own with tongue. We need to create this structure of the hard palate for the wolf. Here, we're selecting the positions of transverse wrinkles based on the hard palate and choosing corresponding horizontal edges. The wrinkle becomes shorter as they move forward and shallower and less obvious as they move backward. The length extends to the gums where the teeth grow. Understanding these main directions, we can proceed with the creation. After selecting, let's press Ctrl+B for beveling, and set segments to 2 to retain one edge in the middle. Due to beveling, there are many pentagon and triangle faces generated in the mesh. We need to handle them one by one. The way to handle them is quite simple. We just select 2 vertices and merge them to create an E-pole at the merging point. However, an E-pole inside the gum is not crucial because this area doesn't move much. We only need to ensure the structure and shape are correct. Let's quickly handle the rest using the same method. This part here is different from the previous sections, but the approach for handling it is as simple as before. Let's select these 5 vertices here and merge them into one, then similarly dissolve the intermediate edge. With that, we quickly wrap up the remaining adjustments here. Then, we select each intermediate edge and drag them downwards diagonally. This effect is done quickly. Let's further adjust the shape of each wrinkle. Switch back to object mode to observe from a normal angle. The current effect is what we expected. In the middle section of the hard palate in the maxilla, there's a pronounced structure that protrudes from front to back. Here, we'll enter edit mode, select the edge in the middle and shift it upward. Because the front tends to be narrower, when we activate the fall-off to adjust, it has a more significant impact on the front. The adjustment we just made caused the entire front to move downward, so we need to move it a bit back to the original position. Because we've disabled the merge and clipping options in the mirror modifier, adjustments cause the edges in the middle to split, just like it is now. However, there's no rush to adjust this area. We'll do it later. There are few edges at the back of the maxilla. We'll add some here later. For now, let's return to object mode and review the overall model effect. Disable wireframe display. Here we'll change the shading to shade smooth. Press Ctrl+1 to add subdivision with level 1. It looks much better now. Currently, the most obvious issue is the central edge problem. Due to mirroring, a prominent central edge has appeared in the middle. Next, we'll address this issue. Let's enter into edit mode and hold Alt while clicking on the central edge to select this loop, which is similar to selecting a loop edge. Here, we click Shift+S. All functions in this menu are related to the 3D cursor. Let's choose Cursor to World Origin. As the name suggests, it can directly reset the 3D cursor to the very original position in the world coordinate, which is the position where all X, Y, Z axes are at 0. We want to scale it along X-axis by using the 3D cursor as the transform pivot point. Let's modify its scale.x value to 0. Alright, next, let's change the transform pivot point to 3D cursor. Then, back to the 3D view, press S, X, 0. This sequence of operations scales to 0 along the X-axis. Oh, I forgot to turn off fall off. Remember to turn it off here, or it will affect other vertices. Perform the same operation for the lower gum. Okay, back to object mode. The central edge is still there. This is still related to the mirror modifier. Now that the basic structure of the gum is done, and we hardly need the mirror modifier anymore, I'll just apply it. Since we already selected the central edge in edit mode before applying it, after applying it, the central edge on both sides will be automatically selected. Here, we'll use the auto merge vertices introduced earlier. Enable it. Alright, just press G. In the 3D view, some adjacent vertices will be merged by mistake. We need to set a merging threshold here. Let's set it to 0 and try. Oops, it can't merge properly. Let's set the value to 0.0001. Similarly, press G. It's not very obvious in wireframe mode, so let's go back to solid mode. See, they've merged successfully now. The sharp edges in the middle are gone, but there's still a trace left. But at least, we've merged them. You can see there is still some overlap in the teeth part. Select the gum model. Let's enter into sculpt mode to check and fix similar issues, and also try to adjust the structure of the gum. Next, let's display the body model. We need to adjust the gum model to match the shape of the internal oral space of the body model as close as possible. Overlap at the bottom or top of the two models is also acceptable. The adjustment for the gum is significant now. You can see most of the teeth have shifted from the position of the gum. After adjusting the gum, we need to match the positions of the teeth. Use grab brush to adjust. Wireframe display might hinder observation, so here I select the model of teeth and gum and solo them by pressing /. Alright, now we can focus on adjusting the teeth and gum. Okay, the adjustments to the gum and teeth are basically done now. We need to smooth out the central edge. Okay, once again, press / to display other objects. The extra objects are still hidden. We only need the body model to be displayed now. Turn off the mask modifier and change the display mode to texture. Let's check the effect in the side view. Now let's overall match the interior of the mouth with the whole model. Check the effect inside the mouth. After adjustments, the fit inside the mouth looks better now. There are some issues here. Let's address them a little bit. There are some problems with overlapping on the outer side. We need to tuck back the protruding parts of the mouth. Hello everyone, welcome back. Let's continue making the tongue. We'll start with a cube again. The structure of the tongue will be much simpler. As usual, the first step is to delete half of the model and add a mirror modifier. Here we'll directly adjust the position of the vertices to match the rough shape of the tongue. Add some intermediate edges. There's also a structure below the tongue connecting to the lower jaw that needs to be created. Alright, now let's enter sculpt mode to adjust the shape of the tongue. The first step after entering sculpt mode is still to smooth out these edges. Here we need to add 2 more edges. Just by smoothing, the shape of the tongue is already quickly emerging. Alright, now let's start creating some bumps on the tongue. The thickest part of the tongue is at the back, getting thinner towards the front. If transitioning from the middle to the sides, it's thicker in the middle and thinner on the sides. Then there's a trait of the tongue, a groove running through the middle from the front to the back. On either side of the groove, there's a texture resembling accumulated flesh, so if you were to look at a cross-section, the surface would be like an M shape. Now, let's use sculpting tools to quickly shape the tongue. display both the body model and the mouth model. The back of the tongue needs to connect with the lower jaw. Let's continue adjusting. Once again, add some edges overall. Continue adjusting the shape. So far, we've completed all the structures inside the mouth. Previously, we were only looking at the effect of the model with the mouth closed. However, what we should really focus on is the open mouth. After all, we're creating these structures inside the mouth to accommodate it being open at any time. Here we need to preemptively create a few bones and, through basic pre-skinning, open the mouth to see the effect. Here we need to use armature. Press Shift plus A to add armature to the scene. Previously, we had turned off the display of bone, so they are not visible. Let's enable it here. Now, in the scene, you can see the armature object we created. Select this object and press Tab to enter into edit mode. Press G to move the position of the bones, R to rotate them, and S to scale them. And press E to extrude new bones. We don't need to create accurate skinned bones like we would for rigging. Our goal here is simply to see the effect of the open mouth. So, based on the rotation of the jaw when opening the mouth, the pivot point is roughly below the ears. One bone controls the upper jaw, one controls the body, and two are assigned to the lower jaw. With this simple skeleton created, the next step is to bind the body model, as well as the jaw and teeth models, to this skeleton. Let's start with the body model. Select the model, then select the armature. Note that the skeleton needs to be in pose mode. If it's not, after selecting the armature object, switch manually to pose mode. Select any bone, then press Ctrl plus P and choose with automatic weight. Quickly, the model is bound successfully. Now, when we adjust the bones in pose mode, they directly affect the model. Rotate this bone to open the mouth. Oh, the default binding effect is quite good. It already meets our needs. Alright, let's go back to solid display. Now, the skeleton is covered inside the model and is not visible. In the Properties editor, click on the green humanoid icon to switch to the armature editing panel. Find Viewport Display and enable in front, so the skeleton will always be displayed in front of the model. This makes it more convenient for us to operate. Alright, let's go back to the 3D view, select the armature, and enter into pose mode. Although the effect is good for now, you can see that when we rotate the bone of the jaw, the upper lip also moves along. We need to modify the bone weights to adjust the influence range of each bone. First, click on Edit and disable Lock Object Modes. Then, select the model and enter Weight Paint mode. Since we've already set the armature object to pose mode, when we select the model and enter Weight Paint mode, we can directly select each bone and check the weight status. There are two key operations. First, make sure to select the armature to enter pose mode before the model enters Weight Paint mode. Second, make sure to disable Lock Object Modes. This allows us to see the weight status of each bone in real time while painting weights. Otherwise, we would have to switch inside the Vertex Groups panel and the Properties panel, which is not very intuitive. Alright, let's continue modifying the weights. Previously, I hid all the faces except those inside the mouth in Edit mode. so the same operations are synchronized in weight paint mode. Press Alt+H to display all faces. Now, we can paint weights normally. First, let's adjust the overall range of the weights. The upper jaw bone clearly tends to cover the entire upper lip. The weight range of the upper jaw bone is obviously too small, and the lower jaw bone has kind of too much. Next, we'll adjust their respective ranges accordingly. The mouth interior is covered by the gums and other models. Press / to solo the models and bones. Now, it is much more intuitive and convenient to adjust. Alright, that's it for the body model. Let's bind the gums, teeth, and tongue to the skeleton as well. However, for these parts, we can bind them to the skeleton by directly assigning vertex groups. Select the gum model. We need to select the range controlled by the lower jaw and assign these vertices to a vertex group. Now, we'll create two vertex groups, one for the upper jaw and one for the lower jaw. Then, we'll rename both vertex groups to the corresponding bone's name. After renaming, switch to the modifier panel, add an armature modifier, and set object to the skeleton in the scene. As soon as we specify it, you can see the model is directly affected. The lower jaw attaches directly to the position of the skeleton and moves with it due to its influence. The upper jaw remains unaffected because we haven't performed any operations on its bone. Continue binding the tongue and teeth to the skeleton in the same way. The tongue is much easier. It only needs to be bound to one bone, the lower jaw. So, we'll select all the vertices and assign them to a single vertex group, then rename this group to match the bone's name. Once again, add an armature modifier and modify the object target. See, it's quickly done. For the teeth, we'll perform the same operation. Now, we can directly see the effect of the open mouth. Hide the armature. The effect isn't ideal. The positions of the structures inside the mouth are incorrect. We still need to adjust them. Let's start with the gums. We'll use shape keys to record what we modified. The gums and teeth need to be adjusted synchronously. Alright, let's continue by adjusting the tongue. Find references and adjust accordingly. We've been adjusting the lower jaw, but the upper jaw also needs adjustment. Display the upper gum and upper teeth separately and adjust them synchronously, so we don't have to adjust each model individually. We need to move the vertices of the upper jaw downward a bit. Disable, connected only and fall off. Simply rotate it and then move it downward. Let's switch back to solid display and adjust it according to the overall effect. Alright, it's done for adjustment. All these added armature modifiers can be deleted now. Oh, the teeth are a bit exposed here. Let's enter sculpt mode and adjust it. Now, only the toenails are left. Let's continue making the toenails. Start with the front feet. Toenails will be much easier. We only need to create one, then duplicate and adjust the positions for the others. Set the cursor to this position. Then, create a cube here. Yes, the toenail also starts with a cube. After scaling to the appropriate size, let's adjust the shape of the toenail in the side view. Make it flatter. Add an edge in the middle, select this loop, and move it upward. This way, we can create both the depression below and the curvature on top of the toenail directly. Let's continue adding edges to refine the model. At the edge of the toenail, perform a bevel operation by pressing Ctrl+B. Bevel the middle part too. Let's adjust the position of the edges to smooth out these sharp corners. Finally, modify the shape of the toenail a bit. Zoom out the view a bit to see the overall effect. Not bad. Let's align this toenail we completed with the orientation and position of the toe. To get the other toenails, we can simply duplicate and place them accordingly. For the toenails on the hind feet, we can copy from the front feet and adjust the positions. After adjustment, add a mirror modifier to the model. The toenails on the hind feet are a bit low. Let's move them upward a bit. Check the positioning of the toenails on the front feet as well. Alright, the toenails are all done. All the models are now completed. There's one more part we need to work on, which is the structure of the eyelids. Let's find the references for the eyes. You can actually see that there's a structure similar to human double eyelids here on the wolf's upper eyelids, and the eyelashes grow right here. So, we need to create this eyelid structure here. Since the topology is already completed, we can't change the direction of the edges to create this structure. We can only add more edges to create it. Let's add some more edges around the eye socket. Enter Sculpt mode and smooth it out. Find a reference of perspective view and zoom in on the eye area. We'll create the structure of the eye socket and eyelids in sculpt mode according to the reference. When we sculpt around the eye tail, you can see that there's a problem with aliasing, which is due to the direction of the mesh not matching the structure we're trying to create. However, it's not a problem because we have enough mesh density now. When you're creating your own models, consider these aspects during the topology phase to avoid such issues. If unavoidable, you can increase the mesh density to mitigate aliasing issues. Let's continue working on it. It's looking good overall. The eye section is also completed. Let's switch back to perspective view and observe the wolf model. As you can see, when we switch to smooth display, the body looks very sleek. There's one final step for the model. We need to restore some details from the high poly model. Before we proceed, let's finalize the model. Delete and apply unnecessary modifiers. Then, let's check if there are any irregular meshes in the model, which are what we previously referred to as non-manifold geometry. Enter Edit mode, switch to Vertex mode, go to Select, then find Select All by Trait, and click on Non-Manifold. Use this function to check for non-manifold geometry in the mesh. Switch to Wireframe mode to inspect. There's a ring of vertices selected inside the mouth. This is because these vertices are non-closed. This is where we left an opening for the throat earlier. Now that the model is complete, we can fill this opening. Extrude some faces backward to simulate the structure of the throat. Enter the mouth inside and fill this face. Using Grid Fill tool would be faster in this case. After displaying the mesh, let's smooth out this area inside the mouth. Alright, check for non-manifold geometry again. It's gone now. Select loose geometry, looks fine. Okay, now let's display the high poly model. Compared to our retopologized model, this one has much more detail on the body. Next, we need to transfer these details back to our topologized model. Here, we'll use the multi-resolution modifier. This modifier is non-destructive. Unlike the subdivision surface modifier, it allows us to sculpt on multiple subdivision levels in sculpt mode without modifying the original model. At subdivision level 0, it represents the original model without subdivision. As the subdivision level increases, we can create more details in sculpt mode, and all the sculpting data is stored within this modifier. When the modifier is deleted, all the sculpting data is deleted too, leaving the original model unchanged. Now that I've explained, let's proceed with the operation. I believe everyone will understand the usage of this modifier through the operations. Let's add the multi-resolution modifier to our topologized model and directly set the subdivision level to 3. However, not every single part can restore the details from the high poly model. For example, the paws and the mouth have significant differences from the high poly structure. The high poly itself doesn't have the interior space of the mouth. It lacks the gaps between the toes also. These areas cannot be restored from the high poly. So the first step is to assign the parts we intend to restore into a vertex group and use this vertex group to control the range. Once assigned, we need another modifier, the shrink-wrap modifier, to assist. By using the shrink-wrap modifier, we can perfectly fit the retopologized model to the high poly model. Since we've subdivided the mesh through the multi-resolution modifier, the current mesh density is sufficient to restore all the details. Use the shrink-wrap modifier again to restore the details from the high poly. Once again, remember to assign the vertex group we created earlier. Alright. Hide the high poly model and check the result. Oh, the difference is quite noticeable. There are some issues around the junction between the neck and head, as well as the edges of the vertex group we drew earlier. But these can all be solved through smoothing in sculpt mode. Okay, let's apply the shrink-wrap modifier now. Everyone should pay attention. When the shrink-wrap modifier is below the multi-resolution modifier, the effects it has on the model will be automatically saved in the multi-resolution modifier after application, without affecting the original model in any way. So, for the seams that appear after applying the shrink-wrap modifier, we can smooth them out in sculpt mode. Next, let's fix these issues in sculpt mode. Select Smooth Brush and smooth it out. In the multi-resolution panel, we can adjust the subdivision level for sculpting. Lower levels make smoothing easier. For the eyes, we previously created eyelid structures, and the shrink wrap is causing issues. Let's fix them using sculpting tools. For the lips, let's just use Smooth Brush. For the nose, I want to make the edges more defined. Let's find the references and sculpt accordingly. And for the ears, let's make the edges more defined. For the seam on the neck, just smooth it out. There are also seams on the feet. Let's strengthen the structure of the toes a bit more. The same for both the front and hind feet. We were only working at subdivision level 1 earlier. After increasing the level of subdivision, these seams reappeared. Let's increase it to level 3. The remaining seams belong to the details at level 3. Alright, that's all the adjustments. You might wonder why we continue sculpting these structures after fixing the seams. Actually, when the details from the high poly model are added, our goal is not only to restore them to the multi-resolution, but also to apply the model once more. This means trying to reflect the multi-resolution effects as much as possible in the original model. Here, we'll find the shape category in the multi-resolution modifier. There are 2 buttons under it. Here, we want to use Apply Base. After clicking it, it may seem like nothing has changed because it only affects the base model. However, when we disable the multi-resolution modifier, we'll see that the original model has indeed changed. There are a lot more details on the body now. Although not as good as the multi-resolution effects, it's already much better than before. This is the function of Apply Base. It helps us utilize the existing mesh to present as many details as possible. I notice there are still some issues with the ears. Let me adjust them again. Alright, for now, this model is completely finished. In the next step, we are going to sculpt textures. That's it for this section. Goodbye. After all the previous steps, there's one final task we need to undertake: sculpting textures. Before we dive into sculpting, it's crucial to make our goals clear. Our primary focus lies on the exposed areas of the character's body, including the nose, eye sockets, soles of the feet, and lips. Other areas covered by a significant amount of fur won't be sculpted since the skin underneath is not visible. Next, we are going to sculpt with references. Let's begin with the nose. We'll utilize the multi-res modifier to sculpt textures. In the last session, we added a multi-res modifier to represent the details of the high-poly model. Here, we'll stick with the same modifier without adding any new ones. Enter Sculpt mode and adjust the level of multi-res to its maximum. First, we'll roughly sculpt the wrinkles texture on the nose. Given the fleshy structure, we'll employ Draw Brush for sculpting. Our primary focus here is to roughly sculpt the wrinkles on the nose, leaving out the finer details for now. In this stage, we need to pay attention to the texture of the model in the sculpted area. For example, we are sculpting the nose now. The brush and sculpting effect are soft. Draw Brush with soft and delicate strokes is more suitable for sculpting the nose and skin wrinkle details. If we are sculpting scales or other hard skin surfaces, we should choose a brush with hard strokes, such as clay brush. In short, it is important to choose the right brush and technique when sculpting, which can improve our production efficiency. For the grooves in the middle of the nose, we'll switch to the Draw Sharp brush to make it more defined. Next, we'll refine the fleshy texture at the bottom of the nose. Moving on to the lips, we'll switch to clay brush to make their thickness. Alright, next, we are going to make the textures in detail. For the nose, we'll utilize procedural textures directly. Enter Edit mode, let's select the faces of the nose, then press Ctrl+G to assign these vertices to a separate vertex group. Here, we'll add another modifier called Displace. In the Modifier panel, click Add Modifier and select Displace. After adding it, click New to create a new texture for displacement. Then, find Vertex Group below and select the vertex group we created earlier. Next, click the button on the right of the texture to enter the Texture Settings panel. Here, switch the texture type to Clouds and set Noise Basis to Voronoi Crackle. Currently, the displacement strength on the model is too intense. Let's head back to the Modifier panel and adjust the strength to 0.005. The strength seems reasonable now. At least it doesn't interfere with our view of the displacement effect after adding the texture. Now, let's return to the Texture Settings panel and tweak the parameters. The texture appears too large. Let's reduce the size. Additionally, we'll further decrease the strength of displace. Reduce the size of texture a little bit. The poly count is insufficient at the moment. Let's increase the subdivision level under multi-res by clicking Subdivide. Reduce the strength of displace. After adjusting the displacement strength to 0.001, it's almost right, but comparing it with the reference, the texture still appears too large. We need to decrease it further. The texture behind the nose is a bit blurry due to insufficient mesh density, so we'll subdivide again. This time, let's increase it to level 5. It might take a moment after clicking it due to the high mesh density. Alright, this density is sufficient. All the textures are clear now. Next, we'll apply the texture of displace to multi-res. We'll need to modify the texture. With multi-res enabled, click Apply on the right side of the displace modifier. We'll need to wait for a moment. Alright, let's enter sculpt mode. First, let's soften the edges of the texture. Switch to the smooth brush and gently stroke over the texture on the nose. After adding the texture, some of the fleshy wrinkles we sculpted earlier on the nose have been softened. Now, we'll strengthen them and add more detailed skin texture. Now, let's add some horizontal stripe textures around the nostrils. Inside the nostrils, there shouldn't be such strong blocky textures. We'll use multi-res displacement eraser brush, which can directly erase sculpted textures. We'll use this brush to erase the texture inside the nasal cavity. Alright, let's continue adding some striped textures around the nostrils. We'll also add some small dots around the nostrils to break the pattern of the tiled texture. Alright, it's okay. Next, we will address another issue. Since the texture is directly tiled, all the intensity is consistent. Here we need to make some random ups and downs to break the regular pattern. Here we use the brush to randomly draw according to the position of the original texture, trying to make the original uniform and dull texture more random. There is another issue here. In this step, we need to sculpt according to the existing texture. We should turn off X mirror so that the sculpted effect can be blended with the original texture. Now, What I sculpted on the other side of the nose is definitely incompatible with the original texture. This is wrong. I hope everyone will avoid this during creation. Okay, let's turn to the panoramic view. It looks good. Next, let's start sculpting the texture of the eye sockets. First, let's make the overall structure clear. We directly add texture to the brush for sculpting detailed textures. In the brush settings, find Texture, click New to add a new texture. In the texture settings, set the type to Clouds. Now, let's start sculpting. You can see that the brush now has some texture applied, but the texture is a bit too strong at the moment. We can adjust the strength of the brush directly. Let's decrease the brush strength a bit and sculpt around the eye sockets. Apply a layer of detailed texture. Next, let's switch to Draw Sharp brush and sculpt some stripe textures on the surface. Alright, the eye sockets are quickly sculpted. Okay, we quickly applied a random texture effect. Next, we will delete the texture and use Draw Sharp brush to sculpt some stripe textures on the eyelids. The sculpting has no effect because the strength is too low. We need to increase the brush strength. Look, now it is there. Let's continue sculpting. Here we directly sculpt it manually to create some random effects with lines of different strengths and lengths, which will be more realistic. Move on to the soles of the feet. Let's switch to the Draw brush. Apply the preset texture, adjust the brush strength, and add the texture directly onto the foot pads. We need to sculpt from multiple angles to avoid missing areas. We'll do the same for the soles and toes. Then the hind feet. Once the texture is applied, we'll add some cracked and scarred textures to simulate wear and tear due to walking on all feet. We need to be mindful that higher subdivision levels consume more computer resources. My computer is already experiencing slight lag. It's essential to adjust the subdivision level according to your hardware. Do not directly set a very high subdivision level, or your computer and the project may crash. Autosave becomes crucial in such situations, although it's best to prevent software crashes altogether. There's a small area at the front foot's heel. Let's sculpt it as well. Alright, these parts are already sculpted. Next, let's begin to sculpt the lips. First, we need to separate the upper and lower lips into different face groups for easier sculpting. Let's set the face groups. We select the mesh of the upper lip in Edit mode. Then we select Face Set from Edit mode selection in Sculpt mode to create a face group based on the selected part in Edit mode. Look, the upper part of the mouth has been successfully assigned to a face group. Next, we use the same method to assign the lower part of the mouth to a face group. Let's first select a circle of edges between the neck and body and hide it, so as to avoid selecting the body part when selecting the mesh of the lower part of the mouth. Okay, we press L to directly select the mesh below the mouth. Then enter Sculpt mode and assign this part of the mesh to a face group. You should notice that now every time we switch between Edit mode and Sculpt mode, there is already a significant lag. This is because we added a higher subdivision level in Sculpt mode, which leads to slow calculation. So everyone must judge and increase mesh subdivision level according to their own computer conditions. Avoid severe problems such as software crashes and project corruption. After setting up the face groups, we can hide the other parts by hovering the cursor over it and pressing H. In terms of lip sculpting, our main focus is on the lower lip. We can refer to our references and find that the lower lip has a strong fleshy texture with many wrinkles, mainly consisting of striped textures and small bumps on the surface. Press / to solo the model. Let's switch orbit method to trackball mode for sculpting. It's more convenient for me. We can temporarily remove the texture here. First, let's sculpt the overall direction of skin wrinkles on the lips. There are some spherical wrinkles on the edges. We can directly sculpt them using Draw Brush. let's continue sculpting the structures around the lips without diving into detailed texture sculpting yet. Alright, now it's time to refine the sculpting. From the reference, we can see that the primary texture on the lips is horizontal. Let's use Draw Brush to quickly draw horizontal lines on the lips. Next, let's sculpt some textures in different directions to break the pattern. Since we're dealing with finer details now, the brush size is smaller. We can add some cracks on the surface. This requires patience to add detail little by little. Let's adjust the intensity of variation on these horizontal textures. We should also pay attention to the inner part of the lips, which is connected to the gum line and thus not visible. Let's sculpt the upper part. Alright, let's quickly slide the brush over the surface and gently add some vertical textures. Fleshy textures are usually not smooth. We want to create a sense of overlapping muscle textures on the model surface. Let's do some touch-up on the lips front part. The results seem acceptable for now. Finally, let's apply the previously adjusted textures to the lips and apply them to the model surface. The lip sculpting is complete. Let's display the remaining parts and switch back to object mode to check the overall effect. Alright, the body is sculpted. We won't sculpt the remaining parts since they're covered by fur. There are still other structures on the entire model. Next, let's locate the tongue model. Since canine animals like to stick out their tongues, sculpting the tongue is crucial for the effect. Let's continue to sculpt the texture on the tongue model. Hide the body in gum. Select the tongue model and change the shading mode to Shade Smooth. Next, add a multi-res modifier to the tongue model. Oh, there's still a mirror modifier retained on the tongue model. Let's apply it first. Alright, now we add the multi-res modifier. Select the model and enter sculpt mode. For the multi-res subdivision level, let's set it to level 3 for now. We can adjust it later if needed. Let's start by quickly creating the overall wrinkles on the tongue. There will be some flesh stacking in the middle of the tongue, thinner on the sides. Here we switch to clay strips brush for sculpting. We hope to create some random and regular bumps on the model surface through the hard strokes of this brush. During the sculpting process, you also need to hold control at any time to create some flipped strokes, which will be more random. We directly use the brush to draw a row of strokes on the model surface according to the line arrangement method. Of course, when sculpting, we must also maintain the volume of the tongue. For example, the front part of the tongue is relatively thin, so it must not be made too thick. Okay, after the drawing is completed, we hold Shift and smooth the strokes. Look, does the surface quickly have a more natural bump effect? Of course, this is not perfect. We still need to modify it. We draw some random indentations on the surface of the tongue. Let's deepen the indentations in the middle part. The tongue surface isn't completely smooth, so let's draw some random wrinkles and indentations. If there are any references showing tongues sticking out, sculpting would be easier. Here are some cracks on the tongue. Let's sculpt the wrinkles at the bottom of the tongue. When sculpting, It's better to refer to multiple references and observe the texture from different angles before sculpting. Alright, the wrinkles on the tongue are basically sculpted. Next, let's apply a layer of detailed bump textures. Similar to before, let's use Draw Brush. Load the texture and directly brush it onto the surface of the model. After applying the texture, we can see that some structures are slightly weakened. Let's strengthen some of the finer wrinkles and manually add some striped textures based on the surface of the tongue. As you can see, when sculpting the texture on the tongue, I've turned off the mirroring later on. We want the texture on the tongue to look natural, and the tongue is inside the model. Keeping mirroring on would result in a noticeable symmetrical feel. Just like with the nose, if we were to sculpt those textures manually, we wouldn't enable mirroring. Alright, the tongue is basically sculpted now. Let's switch back to object mode. Display the other models. Next, we can organize the model and prepare it for the next phase. Before delivering it, we need to organize the project file. First, clean up any irrelevant content in the project file, including unnecessary objects, as well as any extra vertex groups or shape keys on each object. Let's take a look at each object and see if any modifiers need to be applied or removed. The mirror modifier needs to be applied before delivering the project. We then set the naming of each object. My habit is to put the name of the character in the front, then the name of the component, each part separated by underscores. You can name them according to your own habits. The main purpose is to make each object clearly recognized, which is also very important for the collaboration of multiple departments. After naming the models, the final step is to switch to orphan data. In this panel, all the unused data in the project will be displayed. The data can be cleaned up by clicking the Purge button and then confirming. This helps to remove any unnecessary data from the project. Let's return to the default view. So far, all the steps of the modeling are complete. We look forward to the upcoming steps such as texturing, hair, rigging, animation, etc. Goodbye.